Well, friends, I'm so excited because I have a new friend here, and I feel like it's a friend that I know, even though we've met for the first time. Because as I'm in her story, as I've been listening to podcasts that she's been on, I'm like, first of all, I love her. She's amazing. I love her story. I love the book. So welcome, Kari. We have Kari Baker here, and Kari, why don't you just start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, thank you so much, Trisha. I'm so excited to be here. So, I am actually in like version 2.0 of my life. I am 53 years old, and for most of my
Me
life,
too.
there we
53.
go. We have
Did you
so many
graduate in
things in common.
89?
I
In
did
89?
89,
Me
89,
too.
80, 80, 89. You betcha. So,
Love it.
I'd always wanted to be in finance, and I just thought it was powerful. It looked like something really cool on TV, all the women wearing business suits and stuff. And so I had a 30-year career in finance, and I was focused on planning. I was focused on retirement planning and financial planning. I was even a certified financial planner, and I loved it for many, many years. And then right before my 40th birthday, I had my son Brady. And as we all know, having a kid kind of changes priorities in life a little bit. And
Mhm.
as he started to grow, I was very fortunate because I had my own practice at the time. So I had some flexibility and I could go on play dates with him. And I just started noticing some differences in his behavior, especially around other little kids. So I would go to play dates, and of course, I wanted to be able to talk with the moms and bond with the moms that were there. But if the kids were in one room, Brady was as far away as he could be from
Mhm.
the children. So I was either trying to pull him back to play with the other kids or chasing him out the front door because he would also just try to escape. And I used to joke that I needed to hire a babysitter to go to play dates because I never got to talk to the other moms at the play dates.
Yeah.
And there were some other things that were a little bit odd in my mind. He loved the Wiggles, and that in and of itself isn't strange for a 2-year-old, but he got beyond just watching the Wiggles, and he would bring the DVD covers out onto the ottoman and lay them all out in lines and then just stare at them and kind of rock back and forth. And then it wasn't enough to just look at the DVD covers. He wanted to take out the insets of the DVD covers, have us copy them, and make little characters of Jeff's head or Murray's
Mm.
guitar or something like that. And God forbid we would lose one of those during the course of a day. It was, mayhem in our house. So there were some other things. I dropped him off at preschool, and he would just cry his eyes out every day when I dropped him off. And so finally, one day I talked to his teacher, and I just said, are you noticing anything with him? And she said, well, he doesn't want to come to circle time. He's always kind of rolling around in the back when we're in circle time. And when
Mhm.
we ask him a question, he doesn't really respond. He just repeats the question back. And
Mhm.
so all these things were kind of floating around in my head. He was 3 at the time. And I came home and I tried to work, and I was distracted and I couldn't focus. And I picked up this magazine on my desk, and it was one of those kind of society, I guess, magazines that they just mail to your house for free that I usually never
Right.
looked at. And I honestly believe God put that thing right in front of my nose because it was taking me so long to get it. He was sending me all these
Mhm.
messages and I wasn't getting it. And I opened up that magazine, and there was an article that was written by a woman named Patty Dion, whose son Dave was not diagnosed with autism until he was in his 20s. And it created a very destructive mindset for him because he did not understand what was wrong with him, why he was different from the other kids. And as I started to really dig into the description of Dave, it just struck me that, oh my goodness, this sounds just like Brady. So at the bottom of that article, there was a link to an online quiz. And at the time, it was called the Think Asperger's link,
Mhm.
through an organization called Southwest Autism Research and Resource Center here in Phoenix. And I took the quiz. It was 15 questions. I answered every single one of them yes. And I pushed the button, and sure enough, it popped up, your child should be evaluated for autism spectrum disorder. And honestly, I was just floored, but at the same time, I knew 100% in my heart that that's exactly what it was. There was no
Yeah.
denial. Um, there couldn't have been any gray area because every single question that was on that quiz I answered yes to. And So that really began our, what I call our kind journey. And honestly, the first few years, I gave myself about 15 minutes to be devastated. And then I just decided to hit
Mhm.
the ground running. And my husband, fortunately, was just in lockstep with me. And we just decided we were going to run 1,000 miles an hour and do everything that we can to help our son have the most productive and happy life possible. So for the first few years, I really just didn't even acknowledge it. I kept it to myself. We kind of came up with this kind of unspoken rule that we weren't going to even say the word autism in our house. It was, if people would ask us why he had an 8 in the classroom, I would just say, well, he's got some developmental delays that we're working through.
Mhm.
And I would put on this happy face, like everything was good, everything was fine. And after a few years, I just really couldn't do it anymore. And that is when God started really pulling me close to Him, and started going to church. I actually got invited to a Bible study, which I will be honest, at that point in my life, I didn't think Bible study was for anybody but old ladies that sat in rocking
Wow.
chairs and
Yeah.
knitted and did things that I wouldn't be interested in doing. But I went into that Bible study, and it was just transformational for me in understanding, first of all, that my faith could be something so personal with God. It wasn't just something that was book study, but in learning more about Him, I could get closer to Him. And then, it really hit me in very early on in the process that my son's identity is not wrapped up in autism. My identity
Yeah.
is not wrapped up in autism. Our identity is in who God made us to be, with all of the gifts and talents that He gave us in order for us to be, beacons of His glory in the world around us. And it wasn't a lightning bolt that came down and hit me. It was still a longer process through that. But as my faith continued to grow and I saw all the amazing things that Brady did, and was doing, and things that the experts, so called, told us he would never do. Making friends, being in a mainstream classroom, like all of these things that he was able to achieve, um, alongside of all these gifts that he has that a lot of other kids didn't have. He was a crazy
Yeah.
reader. He could read at high school level when he was in elementary school. He's super creative. He's super funny. Um, and so that really started to take the focus off of me and this failed plan that I thought I had been wrecked. I had this image of in my head of being this perfect mom and having the perfect kid. And I think we all go through that before we have our children. And I know that every child goes through things that makes the parent realize, oh my gosh, this was not the parenting plan that I
Right,
had
exactly.
started with, right? But when I really started to view all the things about my son that were so intentional, that God put
Mhm.
in him to help him to impact other people, to change their lives, then that's how the concept of kind families came to me. And kind stands for kids with invisible neurological differences. And it was a process of understanding that, yes, my son has autism, but if he was walking along the street, you wouldn't know it. He looks just
Right.
like every other kid. And I am super thankful for all the things he can do, and the fact that some of his disabilities, aren't more pronounced in public venues. But it also kind of impacted the level of grace that some people would extend to him, because they
Mhm,
thought he
mhm.
should be able to react and respond and do all the other things that neurotypically developing children would be able to do. So the kind acronym, I believe God kind of put in my lap. And
Yeah.
eventually, 2 years ago, he presented this opportunity for me to step aside from the financial services world, to sell my practice and to focus on kind families exclusively. And that's kind of where the book came from, and the podcast. And we're trying to outreach to other parents that are in the same situation now that I was in 10 years ago, and say it's okay to grieve this, new parenting plan that you're on. You just can't live in it because it is
Mhm.
intentional. And just like your kid was born to be the child he is, you were born to be their parent. And God
Yeah.
had every intention of you being able to provide everything this child needs. So it was just a complete shift in my mind of identity, of purpose. And it changed the whole trajectory of my life. I never thought I'd do anything but finance. And here I am in this creative realm, and I'm just soaking it in. I just love it. So I'm just so thankful.
I love that. There's a quote that I've heard recently that the struggle is the way. The struggle is the
Yes.
way that we find God. The struggle is the way that we find answers, not only for ourselves, but for others.
Right.
I know, like, just you were like, I don't know how I can handle this. Well, you learn to handle it. The struggle is the way. You learned to, to work out, to figure out strategies, but now it's helping other people. And I love that through the book. It's called Finding Kind, Discovering Hope and Purpose While Loving Kids with Invisible Neurological Differences. And so, and the
Yes.
cover is beautiful. It's just
Oh, thank you.
such a great book. I'm barely getting into it, but I'm so excited because I'll be taking this to the Czech Republic with me because our daughter has a daughter that's my daughter lives in the Czech Republic full time. Her daughter's on the autism spectrum, and so it's interesting the discovery process because looking back, it seems like it should be more obvious until,
Mm,
but you're just like going with who this child is. It's like every child is different anyway.
right.
And so that
Right.
is like a discovery process. Like, so when we were raising our first set, so we have kids in our 30s, kids in their 20s,
Right.
and then kids, three are still at home under the age of 18, adopted seven, three biological. And when we had our oldest set of kids, we had one of our best friends, her third oldest was had autism, but he was very much nonverbal,
Right.
wouldn't make eye contact. 2 years old, you call his name, he wouldn't turn to look. He
Hmm.
would he would go to the toilet to get water. Like he was trying to like,
Yes.
and
Yes.
he would climb up over, like it was just very clearly not. And my friend quit her job, came
Mm.
home full time. She had another baby before they discovered he was on the spectrum. That I remember going walking over, and then her little baby was like in a dog cage thing because the 2 year old would like hit her. So like
Oh
to have
my
floor time, they had to put like a little mattress in there and a
God.
blanket. So the baby, while he's running around,
Yeah.
could
Yeah.
like play with little toys and stuff without getting assaulted. But it was just like this whole like whoa, and it
Right.
was it was only to protect the baby. It was only for a short amount of time. Like I don't want people saying like, I have a
Right.
friend that
Right.
put her baby in a
Oh,
dog cage,
believe
but it
me.
was like, yeah, it was
You
like,
figure things out when you're on this path.
yes,
So,
yes.
oh
Like
my
she was like
gosh.
needs to be able to go to the bathroom and put the baby down. So this is what things things that you do. So
Exactly.
we were around that family that did awesome ABA therapy. I mean, he became
Yes.
verbal, like so many things, but it was a process, and so that was kind of what had been in our lives,
Hmm.
and then with Amelia, who's the firstborn. Her husband's Czech, she's American, and there's just some she wasn't speaking, and the doctor would say, "Oh, it's because the bilingual thing, because Leslie was only speaking to her in English, he was only speaking to her in Czech. There's different
Mm,
things, just didn't like being around kids, just a lot of those things. But you're thinking it's this cultural maybe differences,
right.
and then as she gets older, there's more challenges trying to go to preschool, the same thing,
Hmm.
like getting
Hmm.
called to the school every day. And so Leslie was here visiting for Christmas a couple years ago. And my friend who's a therapist who's done occupational therapy with our kids, I'm like, can you just like come and play with her and just
Yeah.
see what you think? And she's
Yes.
like, I can't diagnose anything, but she definitely needs to be evaluated for autism.
Mm,
And so then going back though, it's a completely different country, so trying to even get the information, they couldn't fully give her
right.
an you know say that it's on the autism spectrum until she was 5. But now the resources, like she's getting resources, she has an aide at school, like
Mm,
all these
yeah.
things are wonderful. But again, every child, first of all, is different, but even the level is where they are in the spectrum, what they can do, what they can't
Sure.
do. There's not like no cookie cutter set things that
No.
you can look at. And yeah,
No.
and then I will say real quick, Leslie, who is the one that's living overseas, moved there, had her bachelor's at 20, moved overseas when she was 20 to be a missionary, to serve there, still there teaching at university. She said, Mom, I want you to start reading this book on Asperger's. She
Oh
remembers all the
wow.
stories we talked about her when she was little, like didn't like
Yeah.
talking to people in the classroom. She would be solo. She would do all her work way ahead of everyone, all stuff. And
Right.
anyway, reading the book, I'm like, Leslie, this sort of sounds like you. She's like,
Right.
I know, Mom. But again, she was homeschooled. We just
Yeah.
thought she's a little bit different. Like we taught her how to make eye contact. We taught her how
Yes.
to talk back. And so looking back, I'm like, she was probably also on the spectrum, but because she was homeschooled and she had more freedom to
Yeah.
not engage, to do things on her
Yes.
own, but so there's so many different things. So I love that you're saying that this kind is just kids with invisible neurological differences. This is not a book
Yes.
for parents with kids with autism or Asperger's, or maybe you don't even realize your child probably was somewhere on the spectrum. I mean, now she's an
Right.
adult that's
Right.
functioning well, but
Right. Right.
looking back, we could see a lot of things.
Well, and that's the thing that it's not just Brady has ADHD too, and a couple other
Hmm.
acronyms that I call it
Yeah.
neurological soup that
Yeah.
he's created. But he's, it's anything. It's dyslexia. It's sensory
Hmm.
processing. It's OCD.
Hmm.
There's so many different neurological differences within a child's brain that can cause many of the same types of reactions to the world. Executive
Hmm.
function is a big one that kind of goes across all different kinds of
Yes.
diagnoses, but you can't see in the child visibly and outwardly that there's anything different, but they can't understand how to organize something to go from A to B to
Hmm.
C. Or they don't have working memory. So you tell them to do something and they turn around and turn back to you and say, I'm sorry, what did you just tell me to do? And then
Or
those are
try to teach
skills.
them multiplication tables with that.
Yes. Oh
Like
my,
it's impossible.
you can't do it.
Yeah.
I mean, I
Yeah.
remember when we tried so hard because, and this was when I was still kind of in denial about, announcing to the world that my son had neurological differences. And he was in a mainstream classroom and they were doing these math tables, these addition math facts, I think they called it. And he was failing. And all the other kids, you had to finish the math test in 3 minutes or something like that and get as many problems done as you possibly could. Well, that was not going to work for my son, and so
Mhm.
he was
Mhm.
failing. He'd never make it past that first step. Well, when we finally thought, okay, maybe he needs to be in a learning environment that teaches him the way he needs to be taught, he goes into this new school and he does fine with math. He's not a math genius, but he is at certainly at grade
Mhm.
level with math because it's being taught the way that he learns it. And
Mhm.
so, there's all these things. And with girls, especially, I just hear more and more that it's overlooked a lot. So I'm
Yeah.
so happy that your granddaughter they were able to recognize some of those things and then take
Mhm.
action on it. Because the other thing that I hear so much, and it breaks my heart, is, well, I don't want my child to be labeled and I don't want, this to follow them through their life. And it's up to you who you tell,
Mhm.
what a diagnosis is. But as a parent, when you have that diagnosis in your hand, it's your roadmap. It is telling you,
Mhm.
okay, here are things you can do based on this diagnosis that will help your child have a better life. And the earlier you get that roadmap in your hand, the more positive impact it can have for your child. And so I'm just passionate about that. I think, as Kind Families develops, that'll be one of the missions going forward is working with families to try to get that diagnosis earlier and earlier. The woman actually who wrote the article I was telling you about, I've had the
Yeah.
blessing of meeting her in Scottsdale, and we've become friends. And that that questionnaire now is called something different because they don't diagnose Asperger's anymore. They call it the Social Challenges
Right.
Questionnaire. And it's the
Right.
link to it is actually on my Kind Families website. But it's 15 questions, and they're just trying to get that in schools, preschools, and schools to be done right alongside the eye test and the ear test so that these kids can
Mhm.
be identified earlier on. So there's so much to recognize. There's some really cool things that are happening too. I mean, employers are starting to recognize the value of neurodiverse people in the workplace, and they're starting to change their hiring practices and their supervisory practices. And I could get all excited. I get fired up about it because with a 13-year-old now, I'm starting to look 5 years down the road and
Mhm.
10 years down the road and see what's in store for us. But Brady, as a creative, he's written probably 150 different creative writing stories since he was 5 or 6 years old,
Wow.
and he wrote the foreword for the book. And it was one of those things that if people read the book and they're like, it's all about Brady's forward, and I'm totally fine with that. But he wrote it in one take, and it's perfectly him. It just displays his personality and his wit, just to a T. So if you read the forward, you would
And how
know
he compares it
Brady.
to, I just have to read this. This is
Yes.
ADHD is not what you think. It's not like that one scene at the end of The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, when Frodo is about to throw the evil ring into the huge volcano. But at the last second, he gains an unhealthy obsession with the ring and decides to keep it. It takes some outside intervention from Gollum, my precious, and Samwise to make Frodo ditch the ring along with one of his fingers. But it's just like, this is so, like, how old is he that wrote this? And just to get that analogy and to put it into
Ah,
words, I'm like, can he write the whole book now? Like, he needs to write a whole book explaining things. I mean, I think that would
right,
just be
right,
amazing. And
right.
yeah, and it's just so, and just you mentioning dyslexia, ADHD, sensory issues, I'm like, oh, wait, I have 7 children. I have 7 children. This okay. So I'm actually going to buy another copy because I just barely started reading this one. I'm going to keep this one and buy another copy to take to the Czech Republic
Oh my
because I
gosh.
think there are so many other things that we don't even mention. My kids are in a
Right.
homeschool co-op. I sit
Yes.
in the algebra class so I can watch what's happening. So I come home and individually, even though they're in high school, sit with each one and work it through and explain it again, even though they just sat in class. And
Yes.
it's a different thing. But some
Yes.
things
Yes.
like ask my daughter how to get to this one little shop that we visited. She'll tell me turn right, turn left, turn right, turn left. Like I don't even know. And she's like, it's across from here. And she can get me across Little Rock, this big town,
Yeah.
to get to the right place. And I'm like, okay, but why can't you remember 3 times 5? Like, why can't you remember? Like,
Exactly. Exactly.
it's just so different. And it was so interesting because I thought I had 3 kids and none of them were neurologically had none of
Hmm.
them had neurological differences. Now I'm second guessing that, but it was so easy to teach them. They just
Yeah.
learned. I just said read this book and I asked them questions and they did the test and we moved on. And now I sit there in occupational therapy offices, in
Mm.
speech classes, like all this stuff. I'm like, I didn't even understand this world was here. And
Right.
what amazing people and resources
Oh my
that
gosh.
we have. And I realized like I need a community. Like I could be a pretty good solo parent. I mean, me and my husband, you know what I mean? But we can
Yeah.
kind of do it all ourselves. And now I'm like calling this person, getting help with this person, getting an appointment with this person. It is a world out there, but it's also, I think we're supposed to be more interdependent than I had been living as a parent, realizing that there's a community
100%.
that can support each other out there.
Right. So that's a big point that I try to make in the book too, is
Mhm,
how critical community was to
mhm,
me, just personally, because I was isolated. I felt alone. I didn't know anybody else with autism. So I
mhm,
didn't have that I had a language barrier almost. So even people who loved me dearly, my parents, my best friends, they still didn't understand everything that we were going through with the therapies and some of the
mhm,
behaviors and the reactions. And so I'll never forget, my occupational therapist for Brady gave me a post-it note one day with a woman's name on it. And I was really hesitant to call, I will be honest, because I'm like, I'm a grown up. I don't need help getting, friends. And this woman invited me to coffee with some other moms, and they were all autism moms. And they all
mhm.
had kids that were about Brady's age. And I walked in and sat down, and in minutes, I was just bawling because I was finally talking to somebody who spoke my language. And it wasn't, I mean, I saw lots of therapists, I saw lots of doctors, and they all knew what was going on and spoke my language, but it's different coming from another
Mhm.
parent that's going through that. So that was just so powerful for me. And it still is. I'm still friends with those women that I met, all those years ago. And now we're dealing with middle school and high school next year and all that craziness. And so, it doesn't go away. All of the little challenges that are out there
Mhm,
don't just
mhm.
miraculously disappear. They go into all new phases, but that's another reason that knowing my son's identity, who he is in Christ, that he is not the sum of all of his diagnoses put together, that he is a human being that was put on this earth for a purpose. That's just
Mhm.
all the more critical as he's entering these years where there's a lot of other kids his age who don't value that. So
Mhm. Yeah, so
it's so
good. So
important.
the three parts of the book are awakening, adapting, and accepting. And there's so many different takeaways. So I know we can't cover all of it, but the one thing I do want to cover, and you mentioned it before, is that you started going to Bible study. And
Yes.
you're like, this wasn't something that I thought I need. Like old ladies do that. I would love to hear how about your faith journey through this. And I know
Mm,
this is woven throughout the book, which I think is important because I think once we, especially I'm the oldest child,
uh-huh.
grandchild, I can run everything. I can write books, homeschool kids. I could do all these things until you
Yeah.
can't, right?
Yes, yes,
Until there's something that is like, oh wait, God, I guess I need you more than I thought I needed you, which is exactly where I needed to be, where it's
yes.
exactly where you needed to be. So I would love to just hear about how your faith journey
Yeah.
kind of changed and what happened along this path.
Right. Well, so I grew up Presbyterian. It was, and it wasn't, it was something we did. We went to church, but it wasn't, as I mentioned, it wasn't something that I understood could be turned into a relationship with God. And I
Mhm.
will be honest, in my 20s and 30s, I was about as far from God as, as I could get.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I really kind of thought I had a handle on everything. Like I said, I was a planner and everything was working out
Yeah.
just fine, all on my own. And it was after a few years of this journey when I went into that Bible study, what I saw that was so curious to me is how much these women loved Jesus. I could just see it
Mhm.
in their faces. And so that made me want to learn more. And then the real pivotal piece of it came in the very first study that I ever did. I was doing the homework and it asked me to read John 9, verses 1 through 3. And that's the passage where the disciples are walking with Jesus and they see a blind man at the side of the road. And the disciples say, Jesus, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born this way?
Mhm. Mhm.
And I will be honest, I paused in my tracks and I'm like, I'm not sure I want to know the answer to this question.
Yeah.
And Jesus said it was neither this man nor his parents who sinned. He was born this way so that he could show the glory of God. And
Yeah.
that was an awakening for me in my faith. And then I started to see all of these little miracles that had happened all in our journey. And like I said, it wasn't a lightning bolt. These were things I had to kind of sit in that. I had to steep in it for a while. But then I started to follow these little nudges that God was giving me. And not long after that, I think I mentioned once before that I was the kid with the hairbrush in front of the mirror singing Dancing Queen. Well, one of the
Yeah.
chapters is named called Dancing Queen in the Lip Sync Machine. Well, I started feeling nudged to join worship team at this church that I was attending, which was nuts. That was just crazy. It's something I never imagined I would get up and do. I didn't even tell my husband that I was going to audition for it because it was so crazy.
I love it.
And I came home and I'm like, I think I'm going to be on the worship team now. And that now I'm a backup vocalist. I have a heavy emphasis on the backup part, but it is one of my that first time getting up and helping lead worship at church, I just felt the
Mm.
spirit of God fill me so full that I had never experienced anything like that before. And it was just like God was saying, Carrie, this I gave you some gifts and talents. When you use them, this is what it's going to feel like. When you use them to help others find me, this is what it's going to look like. And so I just kept following through. The funny thing about Bible study is that I actually now lead that Bible study. There's
I
almost a
love
hundred,
it.
almost 100 women in it, and I've been leading that for the last several years. So, and it's learning about God, spending time in the Word, and being amazed almost every time that I look at it at something new that I'm finding in it is just proof positive to me that God is real. And the more amazing thing is that Brady has faith. I
Yeah.
was sending him to a Christian preschool. So, some will say he was kind of getting that emphasis at an early age, but his faith was more mature than mine when I was starting to
Mhm.
go through this process. And he blew me away in 2020. He told me he wanted to be baptized. And I had baptized him when he was younger. I actually write about that in the book too, just because I was in fear of the status of the world. And I'm like, I better sprinkle
Right.
some water on this kid's head just in case, and didn't really understand the meaning of it. And when he told me he wanted to be baptized, he said, Mom, you should get baptized with me. And
Oh my goodness.
at first I laughed at him. I said, and I was baptized. It was not there was no pomp and circumstance around it, and there was no even emotion around it because I was 16 and had to do it to join a church at the time with my parents. But um, I wound up getting baptized with my son in 2020, and it was it was just the culmination of all of these um, feelings of God pulling me toward Him. And it just hasn't stopped. I mean, being able to sell my business was something I never thought I could do. It was a small
Mhm.
practice, and I had even been told by an attorney friend, if you want to leave, you're just going to have to walk away, because you're not going to be able to get anything for this practice. And God put this opportunity in front of me, and the people that I've met through Kind Families, and even people that He put in my path 20 years ago that are helping on this journey, it blows my mind.
Wow.
So I say in the first chapter, in the introduction, that Jesus is the main character of the book because He's the main character in my life, and He continues to be. And I do think that even if there are folks out there without faith, there are lessons that they can learn from the book in the change in my mindset that I
Mhm,
think it will
mhm.
lead them back to who they are and whose they are.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's ultimately where I would love for them to be. So,
I love that, and I
yeah.
cannot wait to see what God's gonna do with Brady. I mean, continuing
Yeah.
forward with all these gifts and talents, and with you recognize these things in them, in him, because I just have to share this. So just on Sunday, two of our daughters who have many of the labels that we've talked about just
Uh-huh.
moved to Poland, where they're going to be working
Wow.
for a year in Poland, with a mission group that has a preschool, and that's the way they connect with families. And so I talked to them today. They're playing with kids, and they're the things that they were gifted at. We struggled in school. I'm telling you, so many
Yeah.
homeschool subjects. I'm like, I'll just read it to you, and you just reflect back to me what you learned, because this is going to be so much.
Right, right.
Lots of struggles with some of the school stuff, but when my daughters, especially, I'm like, you're going to be, you could be amazing, like Miss Frizzle, like, from the Magic School Bus. Like, you just,
Yeah.
kids gravitate towards you. Oh, Mom, I don't want to do that. I want to be a music producer or whatever. I'm like, you don't, whatever. You don't play an instrument. Well, we'll just let you think that. She does some
Yeah.
college classes on it, realizes that's not what, but then this opportunity came up, and it's something that I saw in her, something
Mm,
that she's able to connect at a younger level with kids, understand them, really relate to them. Doesn't really kids that have differences, she embraces them, welcomes it. Like, it's just, she's made for this. Her and her sister are there, both of them very good with kids. And
mm.
I'm like, with just as they were preparing to leave to go to Poland, I'm like, are they going to even be able to get there? Like, is it going to be okay? They're there. They're thriving. They're
Yeah.
living in a different country. My
Oh,
daughter's only 2 hours, daughter has lived there for 10 years. It's only 2 hours and 15 minutes by train from them.
oh,
And they're
that's
doing
amazing.
okay. Like, I keep checking on them. Like, but it's like, I never would have thought when we first adopted them 10 years ago, like, oh, in 10 years, you're going to be able to send them internationally to do this thing. It's
Wow.
like, we are just going to this therapy and that therapy and all the things. So, all that to say, like, God has unique gifts and plans, and sometimes it's farther than we can imagine. I never
That's
would have
right.
dreamed of this, but God knew. And the gifts and talents, yes, there's some areas they still struggle in. There's some areas that they excel in, and this opportunity happens to be in an area that if they excel in, and they're working
Yes.
hands on with teachers in a preschool, teaching English, playing games, singing songs in English
I
with
love
little
it.
preschoolers in Poland. And it's just amazing that, and people say, like, are you okay with your daughters moving to Poland? I'm like, Yes, because first of all, I never imagined that they would be this. I know that there's people
Yeah.
there that are watching over them, but it's like just a testimony of what God has done in 10 years to go from where
Right.
we were to where we are now. So it's just amazing. So
And that's the
encouragement to those who may
yeah.
be turning in and like, I don't even know where this is going to end up. Well, it could be more than you can imagine. So I just want to give that encouragement.
100%. Don't ever put limits on what your child can do based on what other people
Hmm.
are telling you. I mean, that is another just big lesson that we learned. And God has the plan, and anything God says He's going to do for your kid, He's going to be able to do. So don't try to put him in handcuffs about your child's future, because He's going to get it done. And
Yeah.
like we have experienced, it could be beyond your wildest dreams. It doesn't mean that hard things still won't come up, and I
Yeah,
do try to be
exactly.
realistic about that, but there are still going to be challenges. But they by playing on your gifts and your talents that God has given you, you could do anything that He sets out in front of you. So
Yeah, I love that. Okay, the book again is Finding Kind by Kari Baker. And it's beautiful. If you're watching this on video, it's a beautiful book.
oh, thank
So
you.
Kari, where can people go to find more information about all that you're doing?
So the easiest place is kindfamilies.com. And there is a link to
Okay.
purchase the book on that website. And then also the Kind Families podcast is on Apple and Spotify. And love to have people tune in there. On Instagram, I'm at Kari A. Baker. And it's
Okay.
Kari, spelled a little weird, but
Yeah.
KariABaker.com.
I
Or
listened to your podcast with Bob Goff this morning,
Oh,
and it
yes,
was
I
so
love Bob.
great.
He
So
was
great.
actually he and Kim Stewart were my writing coaches,
Oh
and
my
they're
goodness.
just incredible humans, both of them. So I was really,
Yeah.
really fortunate to spend time with them too.
I
So
love it. Well, Kari, thank you. And we'll put all those in the show notes. But thank you so
perfect.
much for being here today.
Thanks so much. I hope we stay in touch. It was a great conversation with you, Tricia.
That would be great.